Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the person who disappears doesn't really leave. They just pull back, quietly, subtly. But somehow they never stop watching. Have you ever noticed that? He's not calling, not texting, not showing up in the way he used to. Why? But his name lingers in your viewers list. A friend mentions he asked how you're doing. He accidentally liked an old photo. And suddenly, you wonder, why? Let me tell you why. Because pulling back isn't always about letting go. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about uncertainty. And often, it's about fear. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake that quiet surveillance as proof he still wants you. You'll tell yourself, he must still care. You'll hold space in your heart for someone who's only giving you breadcrumbs. When someone pulls back emotionally, it's easy to assume they've detached completely. It can feel like they just flipped a switch and turned off every feeling they once had for you. But the truth is often far more complicated. Emotional distance doesn't always mean emotional detachment. It's not always about losing feelings. Sometimes it's about being overwhelmed by them. People retreat for many reasons, but one of the most common is internal conflict. He may still care deeply, but he doesn't know what to do with those feelings. He could be afraid of vulnerability, commitment, or the possibility of getting hurt. Instead of leaning in, he pulls away, not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much and doesn't have the tools to deal with it. You might look at his withdrawal and interpret it as disinterest. That's natural. We're taught to measure affection through attention, texts, calls, plans, presence. So, when someone stops showing up in those ways, it feels like abandonment. But beneath that surface silence, there can be a storm of unresolved emotions. He may still think about you every day. He may replay old conversations in his mind. He may be scrolling through your social media, not because he's moved on, but because he hasn't. This is where it becomes emotionally tricky, because even though he's physically pulled back, he's energetically still connected. He might not be reaching out, but he's still watching from afar, and that creates confusion for you and for him. You're left wondering why he left if he still cares, and he's caught between what he feels and what he fears. This kind of emotional dissonance can paralyze a person. It's not just about how he feels about you. It's about how he feels about himself. If he doesn't believe he's enough, if he's afraid of being exposed, of being seen too deeply, of not being able to meet your emotional needs, then even love won't feel safe. In fact, the more real the connection, the more dangerous it feels to him. And so he retreats, not out of coldness, but out of fear. Not because he stopped caring, but because the caring became too real. So, while he's pulled back from the relationship, don't assume his heart has gone with him. People don't stop feeling just because they stop speaking. The silence often holds more weight than the words ever did. It holds his hesitation, his conflict, and his unfinished thoughts. It holds the what-ifs he hasn't said out loud. It holds the part of him that still checks in, still wonders, still watches. You might never hear from him again, but that doesn't mean he's let go. His absence doesn't always equal emotional closure. In many cases, people walk away not because they've stopped loving you, but because loving you demanded a version of themselves they weren't yet ready to become. And rather than rise to meet you there, they stepped back. They disconnected from the relationship, but the feelings, they linger, quietly, painfully, and sometimes permanently. When someone pulls away from you, especially in a way that feels sudden or unexplained, you might assume they're done, that they've moved on, forgotten, or no longer care. But often, that's not the case. People are far more complex than their silence suggests. One of the quiet truths about human behavior is that many people who leave still want to know they mattered. And so, even after pulling back, they watch, they look from a distance, they keep tabs. Because deep down, they want to see the echo of their presence in your life. It's a subtle form of validation. They may no longer be reaching out, but there's a deep, unspoken question hanging in their mind. Did I make an impact? For many, especially those with avoidant tendencies or emotional immaturity, knowing that they affected someone gives them a sense of importance. even if they weren't capable of showing up in the way you needed. It's not always driven by cruelty or manipulation. Sometimes it's just the human need to feel significant, to know that we weren't just a passing moment in someone else's story. This is why he may still be watching you. Maybe not in obvious ways. He might not be texting or liking your posts, but he's checking, quietly, indirectly. He might ask mutual friends how you're doing. He might visit your profile, look at your photos, skim your stories without reacting. He may even try to trigger a reaction without fully engaging, just to see if he still holds a place in your thoughts. What's important to understand is that people often don't disappear because you didn't matter. They disappear because they didn't know how to handle what you represented. You may have stirred something deep in him, something he wasn't ready for. You may have shown him a version of love that required vulnerability, presence, honesty. And if he wasn't ready to rise to that level, he may have pulled back. But the pullback doesn't erase the emotional residue. It doesn't delete the connection. It simply hides it behind a wall of fear, confusion, or pride. And from behind that wall, he watches. Not because he has a plan to come back. Not necessarily because he's about to step up, but because he's curious. He wants to know, did you break? Did you miss him? Did you cry? Did your world pause when he left? Or did you rise without him? That curiosity isn't always flattering. In fact, it can be selfish, but it's real. It comes from the part of him that's still tied to the identity he held in your life. Sometimes, watching is about regret. Regret for how he handled things, for what he didn't say, for what he wasn't brave enough to fight for. And sometimes, watching is about ego. He may want to know you haven't outgrown him yet, that you're still stuck, still wondering, still wishing. And that kind of validation can be dangerous because it keeps you emotionally tethered to someone who has no intention of stepping back in with both feet. But regardless of the reason, his watching reveals something simple but profound: you mattered. You made him feel something. And now, from whatever emotional distance he's created, he's trying to measure his significance in your story. It's not your job to feed that need. It's not your responsibility to be visible for the sake of someone else's self-worth. But it is a reminder of your impact, of the fact that even in your silence, you are unforgettable. There's something powerful that happens when you stop speaking, stop explaining, stop trying to make someone understand your worth. Your silence, once it settles in, begins to speak for you. And often, it says more than your words ever could. This is especially true in the context of someone who has pulled back, someone who expected you to chase, to question, to beg for clarity. When you don't do that, when you choose calm over chaos and stillness over reaction, it creates a ripple effect. And whether he admits it or not, he feels that shift. We live in a world where noise is constant. Texts, posts, comments, calls. Everyone is always trying to be seen, to be heard. So when you go quiet, it cuts through all of that. It creates a space where your absence becomes the loudest thing in the room. And he notices. He notices because silence is unfamiliar. It's unexpected. It's not what he was counting on. If he pulled back as a way to test your reaction, he was likely anticipating something emotional, a plea, a confrontation, a flood of messages. But when there's nothing, when you stay composed, present in your own life, and unbothered by his retreat, he starts to feel a discomfort he didn't prepare for, because silence forces him to sit with himself, with his own decisions, with his own reasons for stepping back. And that silence makes it harder for him to pretend you didn't matter. Every time he checks to see if you've reached out and sees that you haven't, there's a quiet voice in his head whispering, "She didn't need me to validate her worth." And that unsettles him. Your silence shows growth. It shows strength. It shows that you're no longer willing to perform for someone else's approval. And when someone is used to holding emotional power in a relationship, losing that unspoken control is deeply disorienting. Watching you go on with your life without trying to pull him back can bruise an ego more than any confrontation could. It makes him question his importance, not because you're playing games, but because you're finally choosing your peace over his confusion. Silence is not indifference. It's restraint. It's self-respect. It's the quiet knowing that someone who truly values you won't need to be chased. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop reacting to every withdrawal or mixed signal, you reclaim your energy. And in that calm, you create a kind of clarity that no argument or long conversation could ever produce. This doesn't mean silence is easy. It takes courage to hold back when your heart wants to reach out. It takes maturity to sit with your own emotions rather than spilling them into a void that no longer reciprocates. But that decision to stay silent is a declaration in itself. It says, I am no longer giving my energy to uncertainty. It says, I do not need to prove my worth to someone who walked away from it. And the truth is, he's still watching. He's watching not just out of curiosity, but because he feels the weight of your silence. He feels the absence of your effort, and he wonders what it means. That wondering, that's the effect of your silence. That's the power of choosing not to react. It's not about making him miss you. It's about making space for yourself and letting that space speak louder than anything you could say. When someone pulls back from you, especially someone who once gave you their attention, their time, their affection, it can feel like a rejection. But sometimes it's not about pushing you away completely. Sometimes it's about pulling back just enough to see what you'll do. It becomes a test, a silent question. Will she chase me? Will she break? Will she fight for me harder than I was willing to fight for her? And while he watches from the shadows, what he's really waiting for is your reaction. There's a harsh truth here that many people don't want to face. Not everyone walks away with finality. Some people walk away temporarily to see how much power they still have over you. It's not always conscious, not always manipulative in the classic sense, but it is self-serving. He wants to know that even in his absence, he's still present in your mind. He wants to see if you'll unravel without him, if you'll reach out, question yourself, lower your standards, and invite him back on his terms. In that silence, in that emotional distance, he is watching your strength or your collapse. He's waiting to see whether you'll beg, plead, or linger in pain. And if you do, it validates something for him. It tells him he still holds emotional weight in your life, that even without giving effort, attention, or clarity, he still controls your heart. And for someone not ready to give fully, that's a powerful position to be in. It's a game of emotional dominance, whether he realizes it or not. He pulls back, and instead of closure, he leaves the door slightly open. Not enough for you to walk through, but just enough to tempt you to wait outside. And the cruelest part is, he's watching. He's checking in, not necessarily to return, but to measure how long you'll stand there. Because if you break, if you come running, if you text first, cry, chase, he knows he's still the center of your emotional world. But if you don't, if you hold your ground, if you remain calm, if you continue to live, love, and grow without him, that's when the panic begins. That's when he realizes the pullback didn't weaken you, it awakened you. That instead of reaching for someone who was unsure about you, you turned inward and started choosing yourself. That kind of strength is unsettling for someone who expected your world to pause in his absence. When he pulled back, he thought you'd crumble. He expected a reaction that would feed his ego or confirm your emotional dependence. But when all he gets is silence, when he sees you smiling, growing, unbothered, he doesn't just question your feelings. He questions his own decision. He starts to wonder if he underestimated you. If maybe, just maybe, he let go of someone who was stronger than he ever realized. And make no mistake, he will notice. Not because you're trying to make him notice, but because emotional detachment is deeply felt by those who once had a grip on your heart. He'll feel the shift, the emptiness where your energy used to be. And that void will speak louder than any message you could send. Because when someone expects you to break and you don't, that silence becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, he's forced to see who he is, what he lost, and what he was hoping to control, but no longer can. When someone pulls away from you, especially after being close, there's often a quiet expectation that you'll stay emotionally available, that you'll wait, that you'll continue reaching out. and that your attention will remain focused on them. But when you stop giving that energy, when you truly detach and stop feeding them your time, your care, your validation, that absence becomes undeniable. And one of the hardest things for someone to admit, especially someone who pulled back first, is that they miss the attention they once took for granted. He may have stepped away thinking your affection would always be there. Maybe he assumed you'd keep checking in, showing up, wondering. Maybe he thought you'd be sitting in the same emotional space, waiting for him to figure things out. But attention is a currency, and when you stop spending it on someone who isn't investing back, they feel that loss. Not always immediately, but eventually, they notice the quiet. They feel the difference. They miss being the one who mattered. This isn't always about deep love. Sometimes, people get used to the comfort of your focus. They get used to the way you made them feel like they were significant. And when that spotlight goes away, even if they're the ones who walked off the stage, they notice the darkness because your attention brought them warmth, ego, reassurance. And now, without it, they have to sit in their own silence. No applause, no validation, just space and whatever insecurity they were avoiding by walking away in the first place. The reality is, when someone knows you care deeply, they assume they'll always be able to return to that place. They assume your heart is on pause, waiting for their return. But when you break that pattern, when you begin to focus on yourself, when your energy stops flowing in their direction, they begin to miss not just you, but the way you made them feel about themselves. They might not say it. They might not reach out, but they'll check in silently. They'll scroll through your posts. They'll ask around. They'll hover just close enough to feel your energy, but far enough to avoid vulnerability. And that's because your attention, even when things were uncertain, gave them a kind of emotional safety, and knowing that someone out there saw them, wanted them, cared for them. When that's gone, the emptiness becomes very real. People don't always miss you right away. They miss the feeling you gave them. They miss the version of themselves they got to be around you. The adored version, the cared for version. The version that didn't have to earn love every day because your heart was already open. And when that goes away, it creates a kind of emotional withdrawal. It makes them realize how easy they had it, how secure your affection once made them feel. And suddenly, they start watching, not because they're ready to return, but because they're craving what they used to receive without having to ask. And sometimes they test to see if that attention is still available. A like here, a vague message, an innocent, just checking in. But what they're really saying is, do I still matter to you? Do I still have access? And that's where your strength is tested, not in how you respond, but in how you don't. Because the absence of your attention isn't a punishment, it's a reflection, a mirror to show them what it's like to no longer be the center of your world. And when someone was once addicted to that feeling, losing it becomes the loudest thing they hear. Sometimes when a man pulls back, it isn't because he's sure he wants to let you go. It's because he's unsure. He's not done deciding, but instead of being honest about that, he quietly steps back and watches. What he often won't admit is that he wants you to stay emotionally available while he figures himself out. He wants you to keep the door open, to leave space in your heart, even as he distances himself physically or emotionally. And that puts you in an incredibly confusing place, caught between his silence and your hope. This kind of behavior is often rooted in emotional immaturity or fear. He might genuinely feel something for you, but the weight of commitment, vulnerability, or emotional depth overwhelms him. Instead of rising to meet the connection, he retreats, but not completely. He doesn't give you closure. He doesn't say goodbye. He doesn't sever the tie. He just pulls back enough to create uncertainty, hoping you'll keep one foot in, just in case he decides he wants to come back. It's like emotional limbo. You're not in a relationship, but you're not fully free either. He's waiting to see what life feels like without the pressure of connection, while still having the safety net of your feelings. That's why he watches. That's why he keeps some form of presence, whether through social media, mutual friends, or subtle check-ins. He's not reaching out with clear intentions, but he's also not letting go completely. He wants to know you're still there, still caring, still affected, still his in some small, silent way. This is one of the most emotionally unfair positions to be in, because you're left waiting for someone who hasn't clearly chosen you. You're left reading between the lines, trying to understand if his silence is final or temporary. You start to interpret every small signal as a sign of hope, when in reality, he's simply keeping you emotionally nearby for his own comfort. People who are unsure often behave in selfish ways without meaning to. They don't want to hurt you, but they also don't want to lose access to you. And because of that, they linger. They don't fully disappear, because disappearing would mean letting go of the possibility. Watching you, checking in, staying in the background, it's their way of keeping the connection on life support, without offering anything real. The most painful part is that he doesn't even have to do much to keep you there. You're doing the emotional work, you're holding space, you're wondering, waiting, hoping. Meanwhile, he's living in a world where he still has your heart, without having to earn it. And that imbalance is exhausting. It slowly erodes your self-worth, because you start basing your value on whether or not he finally chooses you. But he's not choosing. He's delaying. He's hovering in a place of indecision. And as long as you stay emotionally available, he doesn't feel the urgency to figure things out. He gets to take his time while you stay in limbo. And that's why pulling back doesn't always mean moving on. Sometimes it's a strategy, conscious or not, to see if you'll wait, if you'll remain an option, if you'll keep loving him in his absence. He wants you on hold, emotionally, while he explores his freedom. And the longer you allow that, the longer he delays making a real decision. Because why would he choose when he's already receiving the benefit of your emotional availability, without offering anything in return? That's the quiet power you reclaim when you stop waiting, when you stop keeping your heart open for someone who only shows up halfway, when you decide that you are no one's option, no one's emotional placeholder, and no one's safety net. When someone begins to pull back and you respond by becoming more grounded, more silent, more at peace with yourself, it changes the dynamic entirely. Because what they expected was emotional chaos or desperation or a plea for answers. What they didn't expect was for you to evolve, to become calmer, to detach. And when you do that, you become a mirror, not a mirror that reflects love or admiration back to them, but one that quietly reveals who they are, what they fear, and how they fall short of the emotional maturity required to be close to you. It's deeply uncomfortable for someone to see themselves through the eyes of someone they can no longer manipulate, confuse, or distract. When you were caught up in the emotional highs and lows, they may have felt in control. They may have felt needed, wanted, desired. But when you stop reacting and start healing, when you stop performing for their attention and begin showing up for yourself, you reflect back a version of reality they'd rather not face. Your peace, your strength, your calm, they all shine a light on the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. Suddenly, they can't blame you for the distance. They can't call you clingy, emotional, dramatic, or needy, because you've gone quiet, you've grown, you've become still, and in that stillness, they're left alone with their own reflection. A reflection that may reveal fear, immaturity, avoidance, or a pattern of running whenever things get too real. That's the thing about emotional growth. It's not just something you feel internally, it radiates, and it forces people around you to confront themselves, often without a word. He watches you not just because he's curious, but because he's unsettled. He sees someone becoming whole without him, someone who's no longer operating from a place of lack, someone who's no longer trying to earn his love, prove their worth, or win his attention, and that shakes him. He may not understand what he's feeling, he may not have the language for it, but he feels the gap growing between who he is and who you're becoming. That gap becomes the mirror he doesn't want to look into, but can't stop glancing at. Because you're not just someone he used to talk to, you've become a reminder. a reminder of who he wasn't ready to be, of the kind of relationship he wasn't ready to step into, of the emotional responsibility he wasn't ready to take. Your growth becomes a silent confrontation, not because you intend it that way, but because peace is loud in the ears of someone who lives in avoidance. You're no longer participating in the drama. You've stepped out of the cycle, and that absence of reaction, of chaos, of dependence, it forces him to look inward. It forces him to ask why he pulled away in the first place, why he couldn't show up, why he needed distance from someone who only wanted to love him. Sometimes, the strongest statement you can make is the life you live after someone lets go. And when that life is full, calm, centered, it doesn't just show them you've moved on. It shows them who they really are and who they weren't brave enough to become with you. That's why he keeps watching. Not because he's ready to step back in, but because he's still trying to make sense of how you became someone who no longer reflects his version of the story. You've become something he can't ignore, and that reflection is something he didn't expect to face. There comes a point when your growth begins to outpace the version of you that someone once knew. You start showing up differently. You start healing. You begin to value your peace more than your desire to be chosen. And without realizing it, you evolve into someone who is no longer accessible in the same way. That's when the watching begins. Because even if he pulled back, even if he created distance, he can still feel your glow. And part of him knows he can't match it anymore. You may not even notice it at first. You're focused on moving forward, trying to put the past behind you, learning how to rebuild yourself after someone pulled away. But while you're growing, he's observing, maybe not actively or consciously, but emotionally, he senses the shift. He sees it in your calm. He hears it in your silence. He feels it in the way you've stopped trying to prove your worth. That inner transformation, that quiet self-assurance, it changes everything, because the version of you he once interacted with isn't the same version he's now watching from afar. This is the part people don't talk about enough. When your healing becomes intimidating, when your energy, your boundaries, your strength start to shine brighter than the chaos he was used to, he might still be drawn to you, still curious, still emotionally attached. But he also knows, maybe without saying it out loud, that you are becoming harder to reach, not physically, but emotionally, energetically. The old door is closing. The access he once had is no longer there. He's watching you become someone who no longer needs him to be okay. Someone who no longer waits for the bare minimum. Someone who doesn't crumble when left in silence. And that growth is attractive, but also deeply unsettling to someone who hasn't done the same work. Because now, in order to stand beside you, he'd have to meet you at a level he might not be capable of reaching. He'd have to rise. He'd have to take accountability, communicate, show up. And that's a terrifying prospect for someone who has grown comfortable with emotional shortcuts. This is where the emotional tug of war begins. He may still feel drawn to you, but he hesitates, because approaching you now requires more than it did before. The old version of you accepted inconsistency. The new version of you doesn't. The old version tried to prove she was enough. The new one knows she is. And that knowing, that quiet confidence, it creates distance he can't cross without confronting himself first. So he stays in the background, watching, hoping you'll still feel something, hoping you haven't outgrown him entirely. Hoping your glow isn't a sign that he's been left behind, and maybe part of him wants to come back. But he knows deep down that the version of you he once had easy access to no longer exists. You've elevated, and that elevation makes it harder for someone who's still stuck in their patterns to reach you. That's why some people pull back, yet continue watching. They still feel the pull, but can't step into the space your growth now occupies. Because you're no longer living in the emotional places they felt comfortable in. You're not begging. You're not explaining. You're not trying to be enough for someone who couldn't see your value the first time. You're just being, and that being, that calm, whole